Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Partnerships in SaaS. As always, I'm your host, BARRETT King. With me today is Cory. He's the VP of Partnerships over at Sendoso and an absolute rock star. He's got a backwards hat on for those of you that can't actually see him, which makes him even more badass. And I'm super fired up to have you on the show, my friend. Welcome to it.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this.
Now, we're going to have some fun. I think you've got something really interesting to share, quite a few things actually. Before we do the same thing I do in every episode, I want to touch off and kind of kick off with this idea of what does partnerships mean to you? You said it's about relationships. It's a mutual relationship where two companies solve specifically a pain point for their customers and drive revenue together. It's not in the business of partnerships. You said, I'm not in the business of partnerships. I'm in the business of relationships that make a ton of money together and grow faster. I think that's brilliant. It's honest, it's direct, it's straightforward. Would you keep it? Would you add it? What would you do?
Definitely keep it. I mean, I've had the pleasure of being in partnerships for the last 13 years. And the reason where my kind of definition evolved was just the relationships that you build and the relationships that you create. And this is direct feedback from partners. So like my definition has been created by the relationships that I've worked with and agency partners that have basically been like, do you know how much money we've made together? And I'm like, no.
I love that.
And he gives me the amount. I'm like, holy crap, where's my cut? No, just kidding. But
10% every transaction.
Exactly. And so that's kind of like where the definition came from, was actually from my partners.
Yep. That's cool. And so when you think about partners, right, you mentioned agency, like I'm from that world. Most of my partner experience is agency. When you look at channel, we talk about partnerships, we talk about programs and whatnot. In your experience, you can talk about where you are now if you want. You can talk about kind of the blanket of your last 13 years you mentioned. Do you typically see folks entering into that dynamic because they want to generate revenue, because they want, at least in your experience, because they want more, partner generated revenue? Because that's a hot topic right now. A lot of folks are with the current market, right? It's like, for those listening, it's February 2023. Global market's in kind of a weird place.
Yep.
Partnerships is kind of trendy, right? Everyone's talking about how do we generate more revenue more effectively, et cetera. You think that's like kind of the anchoring component of what you're seeing a lot in the market right now?
I do. And I think that you're also seeing a lot of partnership people part of layoffs. And the reason for that is because of the reason why people get into partnerships is this flawed thinking that I'm going to open up these partner programs and I'm going to automatically have all these partners going to be like, your brand is amazing. Let me represent you. And then I'm going to go sell it and I'm going to represent it. And unfortunately, that's just not always the case. And so when I go and do work with different companies, I try to look at their ICP first and foremost. And then I look at, do they actually justify services? Does an integration make sense? Are there benefits to the direction of which that they're actually going for a partner program? But the problem is they get super bought in, which I love, but they don't set the foundation accurately, in my opinion. And so there's this flawed thinking that if I do this, if I build it, they will come. That's not always necessarily the case. Sometimes it's slow rolling, or they have missed definitions or missed goals as far as how quickly they think they'll get it going. And they also have this flawed thinking that if I open it up, I'll get these referrals and I don't have to give anything back. And that's just not the way the world works, right? You have to build these relationships and you have to build a center of trust between these relationships. And so unfortunately, that's kind of what's happening is there's been this massive push the last 3 years around partnerships, which again, I love. But at the same time, I think we're as partnership professionals are not making sure we're defining our what should happen or the success and what that should look like and how long or potentially how long that might take. And so that's kind of where it's been interesting over the last year, seeing what's happening in the economy.
Well, you said foundations, right? So let's double click on that because it obviously speaks to, I think most importantly, the last piece you described just now, which is attribution, which is like sort of defining how we contribute to the greater business, right? So, do you look at it in terms of then, influence revenue or partners sold? How do you think about revenue impact from channel and just general business impact from channel, in a small, medium, or large organization? I think it's kind of irrelevant just in general, though.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I try to set up my partner programs in a way that they solve a problem within the organization as well as an opportunity for brand exposure for both parties, right? So whether it's referral partners or affiliates, and then usually that is submitted, right? There's really no influence revenue there because those individuals are just spreading links, tracking links all over the place, right? Then you have your...
And it's clear too, to your point, not to interrupt, but it's clear. It's like you click this link, therefore I can give you attribution straightforward.
Yes. Yeah. Super easy. And that's the intentions. Just go share and drive traffic to our site, right? So super simple execution. Then you have what we call our agencies, resellers, MSPs, whatever you want to call them. We have a lot of names for them for whatever reason.
We really do.
And those ones, it's less, in my in my opinion, it's less on the influence revenue and still submitted, because now you're talking about a more educated, a more further down the pipeline prospect or opportunity, right? So by the time they get there, they've either submitted or they've told you about this opportunity. Where influence comes in, and where I think there's a massive, massive miss in the industry, and a lot of sales leaders and a lot of even CEOs I've talked to have a problem with influence revenue. And it's because I don't think we fully understand it yet. And what I mean by that is influence revenue is like a sales AE gets a call and they say, hey, so-and-so referred me. We're relying now on that AE to go and check that box that, by the way, this was influenced by the partner. And we also look at it, and a definition of influence is like, they didn't influence the deal. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about influencing their conversation.
So it's lead attribution in many ways. Then.
Yes. And that's all I'm really looking for, is that lead attribution. And the way that we look at it from a pay perspective is we actually pay less on influence for our reps than we do on submitted. Makes sense, right? Because we still have an SDR involved and da-da-da. But what we've done is we've furthered that and said, we know that the partner managers are doing such a great job with integration partnerships or tech partnerships. And when you have 30 AEs, 30 CSMs, and you're building a relationship, you're going deep into these organizations, and they're talking about you, they love you, you have an integration, they're never going to submit a lead. Unless it's an event, they're never going to submit a lead. So that means all the work you're doing, all your hard work is for naught in a way. Unless you do what we've done in the past, which is we set up Gong to listen for our partners to being mentioned. So we don't have to rely
that's interesting.
Yeah, so we don't have to rely on the human anymore. And the rule that we put in place is if the partner gets mentioned by the third party more than 3 times, we check it as influenced.
That's fascinating.
Right?
I've never heard someone do that before. That's a really smart way to use AI, to use the tools that are out there. That's interesting.
But what's great about it is if you look at the numbers, 50% of our numbers in Q4, 50% came from influence revenue.
And before that, if you weren't tracking it, if you weren't using this interface with Gong and the smart rule, you weren't able to attribute that 50% came from those. Exactly. So you can't double down on those investments.
Yeah, and you're literally screwing yourself.
Sure.
Because your impact is not being qualified. So like you look at the situation where we're in right now, where you're trying to justify your role in a partnership place. I can go directly and say, I touched this amount of revenue, both submitted via events and influence. Our partners are talking about us. What's another cool thing about the influence is now I can beta test. I'm a big data guy. I love to do things and see what happens, right? And so at my last role in Active Campaign, I used to call it levers, and everybody made fun of me because I'm like, what lever can we pull? What lever can we pull? And it was because I had a list of levers, like I knew this could generate 50K. So if we were short by 50K, we'd pull that lever. It hadn't been pulled in 30 days, whatever it is, right?
That's brilliant.
So what I'm doing now is one of the strategies that you can do is you can start for Sendoso, we send gifts. That's what we do. We send mail, cookies, whatever it may be, right? So I can send a thank you gift to 200 CSMs. It's sincerely, thank you for partnering with us. And you know what's going to happen? I'm at the forefront of their minds. I'm sitting on their desk because it's a succulent. And they're going to, and literally they're going to talk about us. And you're going to see that number for influence. And we've done this, and it'll start where we had one partner at 65K 1 month influence revenue to 265 the next month.
And are they driving that much more value then to you guys? Or are you just seeing the attribution for that value change because you're recognizing it differently?
Yeah, well, we're seeing that the influence is massive in the sense that the partner's legitimately talking about us. So they're legitimately saying you need to talk about it. And what's great about that is then now you have partners more receptive to doing cross-beam work and reveal work together, where you can now tag team deals and tag team opportunities. And so it's just this, and then you check it in influence, right? You bring a partner in the deal and check it as influence. It's not submitted, it's not generated, but you brought a partner in on the tech side where it was their customer, your opportunity, and the sales and CSM crossed, and boom, magic happens, right? And so you check it as influence. And so there's massive benefits to that. And I get why a lot of organizations don't appreciate it, but it's a very short-sighted view in my opinion. And I literally won't go work for another organization if I have to, if they're not open to that idea.
I'm going to call 10 people after I hang up with you today and tell them to go and turn their Gong inward on their own opportunity set. What's brilliant about it too is you're talking about it in terms of not just validation that it's working, but I wouldn't make fun of you for the levers. I think the levers are brilliant. And if those are plays that you're talking about making, which they clearly are, now what you're doing is siloing into, or honing in on, the different mechanisms that you can implement, the plays, the levers to pull, I'll use your term. I like that will generate some sort of a tactical output. So all of a sudden now partnerships becomes a direct influence to output revenue, not just in terms of a natural, kind of cadence of how we forecast and how we generate leads and the stuff that we're used to, but more importantly, you just took the art of partnerships and added science. And I think that to me really turns up the volume on impact. That's really cool.
Yeah. We talk so much pipeline. It's like,
it's all pipe. Yep.
Partners don't give you pipeline. It's just not going to happen unless you create a rule where it's like, you'll lose the deal after 120 days unless you register it. And then they're going to register their whole database. That's not a pipeline. Right. And so this just gives you insight on again, how the effort that's being put in. And honestly, it's the other thing it gives me churn concern for my partners. So in other words,
interesting.
If I see my influence revenue dropping, it means one thing, they're not talking about us. And if they're not talking about us, I have a problem. And so I can match by partner quarter over quarter. If their revenue starts dropping from influence, it means they're not talking about us, which is a problem. They maybe talk to a competitor.